God morgon, varmt välkomna ska ni vara till dag 2 av Transportforum 2026. Igår så hade vi en innehållsrik dag med massa kunskap, inspiration och nätverkande. Jag hoppas ni tog väl vara på den. Det var ju också mingel och middag på kvällen med show. Och du som glömde den här kan hämta den lite senare i receptionen. Igår så brottade vi ner automation, självkörande fordon. Idag står elektrifiering av transportsystemet på agendan. Vi ska sätta igång med några mentimeterfrågor. Vi behöver alltså lämna appen nu och ta upp telefonerna. Och antingen så fotograferar man en QR-kod eller så tar man det siffervägen. Par preferens där förstås. Några frågor för att leda oss in på dagens tema. Det kommer att handla om resiliens i transportsystemet i vår plenumsession. Och för att sätta igång oss lite så kommer här 3 frågor till er. De står på engelska. Det kommer att bli språket sen när vi har vår keynote speaker och i den diskussion som vi har i ämnet så småningom. Där ni också är välkomna att skicka in era frågor via appen, konferensappen så småningom. Jag påminner om det igen. Men de är lite kluriga. Compared to fossil fuel-based transport system, an electrified system will be less resilient, equally resilient or more resilient. Resiliensdiskussionen kommer att gå som en röd tråd. Resiliens på kort sikt, väldigt kort sikt och också på väldigt lång sikt. Det kommer att följa med oss i samtalet sen. Och ni får hemskt gärna diskutera sinsemellan när ni svarar för att det är en fråga som den här väcker ju lätt fler frågor. Det är ju ändå 16% som tycker mindre resilient. Än så länge leder mer resilient, men väldigt tätt följt av att det skulle vara likvärdigt med det system vi idag har, eller det traditionella fossilburna systemet. Kan vi definiera resilient får jag få fråga här. Så bra. Det ska vi göra sen i keynote-samtalet, för det är där vi är nu. Jag vet att ni sitter och tänker det här föder fler frågor hela tiden, så att tack för den. Ni har 15 sekunder på er att skicka in ett svar, sen tar vi nästa fråga. Hoppas även att ni som följer oss på distans passar på, för det är ju fullt möjligt att göra det. Skicka in era svar. Då byter vi fråga. To what extent will battery recycling contribute to the transition to electrification? I vilken utsträckning kommer alltså återvinning av batterier att bidra till övergången till elektrifiering? Inte alls, lite grann, i stor utsträckning, eller är det avgörande? väldig spridning. Vi tar några sekunder till, skicka in svar och så tar vi nästa fråga. Och där byter vi. Should national large-scale extraction of minerals in Sweden be supported for electrification? Skall vi tillåta storskalig utvinning av mineraler i Sverige till förmån för elektrifiering? Lite jobbigt binär. Jag vet, men det finns en tanke bakom. Yes or no? Ja, då låter vi det löpa ett par sekunder till. Och klipper där. Vår ambition är ju, som utlovats, att gå djupare in i frågorna och komplexiteten som med nödvändighet följer med under den här sektionen. Och de här svaren kommer vi att ta hänsyn till lite senare. So, over to our keynote speaker, Sonja Ye, Professor of Transport and Energy Systems at the Department of Space, Earth and Environment at Chalmers. Just a brief introduction. Her research focuses on how electrification and alternative fuels can be integrated into a transport system and how robust energy systems can support this transition. Dr. Jay's expertise is held in high regard internationally. She's worked extensively with international researchers, stakeholder groups, governance bodies, and regularly advises, collaborates, and provides inputs to international organizations on resilience in the transport system. Among numerous achievements, Dr. Jay has played an important part in driving change by participating in developing climate policies toward reducing the environmental impacts and GHG emissions from transport. On rethinking resilience in low-carbon transportation futures. Sonja Ye, most welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Karin, for the very kind introduction. And I'm very happy and honored to be here to talk about this important topic. I also really enjoy listening to various presentations on the related topic yesterday. It gave me a lot of inspirations. My topic today is rethinking resilience of low-carbon transportation. Whenever I give a talk on resilience, people always ask me, what do you mean by resilience? So let me start by defining resilience. Indeed, when I went to various presentations yesterday, there were various definitions, different terms being used. People think and define resilience differently. So let me start with my presentation with a definition. Resilience is to prepare the system against external threats. And that threat is a hazard that have a bad consequence to the system. So prepare the system against hazard and the potential bad impacts to the system is about safety and reliability, ensure the safety and reliability of the system. But we cannot prepare the system against any possible threats that are imaginable. So we need to take consequences into account. We can have small frequency events with very, very large consequences, or we have high frequency events that have small consequences. So balancing the potential consequences by ensuring the safety of the system is in the realm of risk management. So even if we can manage the risk of the system properly, we still cannot ensure the system doesn't fail. And so when system fail, we need to make sure a system can recover into its original function or at a reasonable time and ensure we minimize that damage. And that is a holistic view of resilience. It covers all aspects from preventing hazard, considering the consequences to ensure the system recover to its impact and function to a normal state. We can also put these events into a time series. And so in a time series, and we look at the time series against system performance, a system is normally operating at its optimal state, 100% performance, and that is the concept of reliability. Reliability is to ensure the system consistently performs in its normal conditions. When disruption occurred, and it will occur, we want to make sure the system still performs roughly at its design level. And that is the concept of robustness. Robustness is when disruption occurs, we still want to make sure the system performs at optimal level. But we cannot ensure disruption doesn't occur, and we know disruption will occur. When disruption occurs, we want to make sure that disruption doesn't affect the system to the minimum. We want to make sure that it affects the system minimally and the system can recover within a reasonable time. So ensuring the system can withstand shocks and recover and adapt over time is the concept of resilience. Just to be sure, we have been dealing with transport resilience for the longest time. We know and we plan for it. This is what we do. We are not new to this new concept, yet we worry about resilience all the time. Examples, for example, when COVID struck, it has major disruption to our transport system, and how do we prepare for the next COVID strike? We deal with the winter storm every winter. It majorly disrupts our transport system in Sweden and traffic. There are increasing reports that snowstorms have disproportionate impact to the electric vehicles, chargers freeze, long queues at charging stations, and stranded electric cars and trucks on the highway. Geopolitical events, new threats to the energy system will also have potential implications to our transport systems in the future. Last but not least, the blackout in Southern Europe across many European countries majorly disrupt the energy system, and we worry about its impact in our future transport system when we are increasingly electrified. So whether it's an existing threat, new threat, emerging threat, we need to be prepared for it. And as I mentioned, we've been prepared, we've been working on this for decades. In our recent publication in Joule, we look at the resilience performance indicators in the transport sector. And it's very, very comprehensive. We have resilience key performance indicators for different modes, for our IT system, for passenger transport, freight transport. And we have KPIs such as reliability, redundancy, accessibility, travel time, waiting time, maximum flow rate. We have a whole host of KPIs that we have designed and working with those KPIs. Even for the fuel sectors, fuel supplies, we have measures such as strategic reserve, storage capacity, prices, price fluctuations. We've been dealing with this for a long time. Why do we need to rethink about resilience? And I think there are two reasons. One is these key performance indicators are designed for one mode at a time, or even one infrastructure at a time, for one road, for one terminal, one airport, or one port. As if we can ensure this bridge is safe, we can ensure our transport system is resilient. And we know that's far from truth. The second point, the second reason this is insufficient is we have new fuels in the transport system. We have KPIs for fossil fuels. Do we have similar KPIs for the new transportation fuels? Electricity sector have very, very good resilience KPIs, as many of you know. But what's the implication for the transport system? How do we transfer that to the transport system resilience planning? They're insufficient because the existing KPIs are a great start, and they're really, really wonderful. But they're insufficient in the new system where the transport sectors is increasingly coupled with our energy system, and they're increasingly digitalized. In this integrated, coupled future transport systems, the risk will have cascading effects across systems and across sectors. And we may not be ready for that. We need to do a lot more to improve our thinking and planning to make sure that we're prepared. We need to translate the current measurement performance metrics into system thinking. Are the current performance metrics, are they useful? Are they enough to help us meet the system performance of resilient transport system? That is the key issue I think we are working toward by continuing to improve what we have. So I will give you a few concrete examples on the specific case studies we've been working on. The first case study is we are in a consortium with some of you in the audience developing pilot sites for megawatt charging stations. Megawatt charging stations are important technologies because they're critical for the development of electrified heavy-duty trucks. They use a lot of energy. They're tightly integrated with our electricity grid. And they're very sophisticated in terms of digitalization and interoperability requirements. Properly managing this charging station and charging sites is important for logistic management. So we have developed a serious resilience API for these charging station sites. We take the existing data that they are required to collect and report to the regulatory agencies and translate into KPIs. And those KPIs address different aspects of resilience, including reliability, robustness, and the recovery. Some of these KPIs address one particular aspect. Sometimes they address multiple aspects. There are also KPIs for cybersecurity and communication integrity. But then there are also KPIs that are important for resilience planning, but we're not collecting right now. So it would be nice to think about what additional data do we need to collect, and would be useful when we think about improving the resilience of a charging site as we go forward. So these site-specific resilience KPIs falls into these 6 categories of resilience indicators. But a site-specific resilience KPI is helpful but we need to make sure that interoperable. We need to make sure they are consistent for multiple sites, multiple chargers, multiple vendors, and multiple countries. So we can collect and measure the resilience performance consistently over spatial and over time. But ultimately, those resilience KPI, policymakers they don't necessarily care about resilience KPIs. What they really care about is something that they can turn into insight that allow them to make policy decisions about trade-offs. For example, do I need additional backup infrastructure on site? Do I need spares? How do I improve my operational efficiency to improve the resilience? And to do that, we need to use scenario analysis. We can do that through scenario analysis to imagine future scenarios, future pathways against various shocks, such as climate events, demand surge, outages, and fuel prices, and use that to decide what should be the optimal investment decisions that achieve the system performance, system resilience that we care about, such as cost, greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. An example would be we use an optimization energy system and transport system model to look at a Spanish case study. In the case study, we run multiple scenarios of future energy and transport systems and run them against potential threats, and in the end, measure them against key performance indicators of the system. What we found is to increase the robustness of the system to achieve a resilient system doesn't need to cost more, doesn't need to be more expensive, and doesn't need to increase emissions. So advanced planning is important in helping decision making. The next question is, can we have designed a system to achieve the most resilient society? And I think there's no single answer, because the most resilient society depends on who you ask, who are paying, who will benefit, and who might be affected more or less. And they would affect different stakeholders in the society differently. And those are hard decisions and hard discussion we need to make and decide collectively to achieve a resilient future that we all share. And that's why the stakeholder interaction, stakeholder discussion, and co-design the future is very important, and that has shown in various presentations yesterday that I very much enjoy. So if once we decide a resilient future, to get to a resilient future we want, we need to work with the system we have. And having worked with policymakers for decades, designing policy instruments, I think one of the misconceptions I always find when talking to people is people think policymaker is a single entity or it's a homogeneous body. And that is far from true. In reality, policy decision makers, they sit across organizations. They scatter around organizations. They have different roles, different responsibilities, and different mechanisms and levers available to them to make those decisions. So I'll give you an example. We have 3 European study projects looking at energy transitions at ports. We have develop living labs, working with ports, develop living labs to understand how do they make investment decisions at ports to make energy transitions. And what we found is understanding the governance structure and ownership is very critical in understand how ports make energy transition decisions. Ports can be completely privatized. It can be a private port where the infrastructure operation decisions and equipment purchase decisions sit with a private single entity. Or ports can be completely public, or a landlord service port where there's a mix of ownership within the port, and the governance structure very critically hinges on the ownership decisions. So in order to make energy investments, for example, a private port may be able to make an investment decision, but they have to consider the cost, resource availability, and so on and so forth. Versus a tool port or a landlord port, they don't own the infrastructure. They don't own the operation decisions. So the tool available for them to make renewable energy investment is through service contract. So what they can do is to design resilience KPI and use that to impose over the service contract, the service agreement, and that is the lever they have. So properly recognizing the tools and the levers available to decision makers is a very important lesson. So with that, I want to give you a 3 take-home message about my talk about resilience today. The first take-home message is we have a great start. We have a great foundation. We work with resilience. We work with the planning. But they are insufficient because we have new technologies, or we have new threats, or existing threats, but they are changing the technology and the users and digitalization. So we need to broaden our system boundary, and we need to design resilience at the system level. And to do that, we do scenario analysis, we do robust optimization to ensure that we achieve a system resilience through individual performance indicators that are component level. The third key take-home message is recognizing the governance levers available to policymakers. To get to the system we want is to start with the system we have and recognizing the tools and levers they can leverage, and that's the way we make the change. And with that, I am happy to I'm concluding my talk and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Sonja. Most enlightening and at the same time intriguing, don't you think? We are going to sit down for a discussion, the sofa, so please take a seat. And you'll be joined by Anders Nordelöf, Professor of Environmental Systems Analysis at VTI, also part-time researcher and lecturer at Chalmers. Welcome, Anders.
Thank you.
So we start on an entirely different end, although related, of course. Anders, in your expertise, it's LCA, life cycle analysis. I think we all have a general idea of what that concept means, but what is it to you?
It is about investigating the environmental impact and quantifying the environmental impact of a product system or a service system over all stages in the life cycle.
Mm-hmm. So what research projects of interest do you have in the pipeline now?
So one really interesting project that I finished during 2025, a PhD student that defended his thesis, was about large-scale lithium-ion battery production and recycling. And then we looked at the environmental impact of different cell design and also going, which is very relevant for the discussion around resilience and supply chain, about lithium extraction in South America and Australia and so on.
Yeah, and we're getting there in this discussion in due course. So, Sonja, do you recognize these projects that they are you also in the same business at your department?
Yeah, LCA tools, yes. Maybe not in a battery application, and I would say that LCA in a way is a form of KPI that you use indicator to measure the system performance, and it also have a lot of properties that we discuss. How do you define system boundary? How do you make sure that it's measurable and transferable and operational and stable over time? And some of the policies that I've worked in California for a decade, and we worked on low carbon fuel standard, which is a policy that was first to regulate fuel performance based on its life cycle and performance emissions.
Yeah, so you're both system orientated in what in your focus.
Well, if I may add also,
sure.
then, because I think in relation to resilience, I should have also have said that it is a lot about looking at the resource use and the resource demands, of course, and then to understand what you need to make all these products and the loss rates and so on. That's very, very, very important to understand the long-term possibility of having a certain technology.
And oftentimes, it measures the performance in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, environmental impact, such as can be water pollution. So they also have a certain key performance that you really objectives that you try to achieve.
Yeah. So criticality is one thing, which is also related to life cycle assessment and so on.
Absolutely, yes. So we learned about reliability, robustness, and resilience. Do you think we will be able to put our trust exclusively on an electrified transport system in emergencies and difficult conditions, speaking about the urgent timescale here? Or don't we need braces and belts with fossil fuel backup? Sonja?
Well, I think the audience have answered that very clearly, that they think an electrified system can be more resilient. And I would say where it's not so much about more or less resilience. We're dealing with different threats, we're different risks and different system vulnerabilities. And so we need to rethink about what are the vulnerability in a new system, and how do we address those vulnerability early and across institutions.
You demonstrated the MSD system, for instance, the multiple, remind me of the abbreviation. What does it stand for, MSD?
Multi-system dynamics.
Yeah. Is this in operation somewhere?
Yes, I think electricity system, it's a very good example where electricity system is designed because to ensure electricity system is resilient, and it has an impact on everything that uses electricity. But I think the challenge for us is how does that translate into a transport system? How do you make sure who has the priority when there's a disruption? And I don't think we have that discussion, and we need to have that discussion.
Anders, comment. Do we need a backup?
I think that if we look at electrification across all transport modes, I think that there will be areas where it's very hard to kind of electrify everything. But I do see that it comes in basically all modes of transportation. And also, it also plays a role in, you can convert electricity also to fuels with today's technologies, meaning that electrification is a very, very broad concept here. It's not only about using electricity stored in batteries, even though that is absolutely a huge share of electrification. There are many different ways to use electricity and therefore electrify the transport system. I do definitely see future use of liquid fuels coming from the biofuel side, definitely, in my perspective.
Yeah, so electrification is maybe broader than we usually think it is.
Yes, possibly. It depends on who you are, of course. Some people will think it's a very broad thing, and others might think about battery-based electric passenger car.
Yeah. So we need to keep those dynamics in mind when discussing electrification. You are welcome to submit questions through the conference app, so join in if you wish. Sonja?
Yeah, maybe I'll use an example in a fossil fuel system where you talk about backup. In the fossil fuel system, the backup is, as I mentioned, strategic reserve. How many days of reserve do we need to have? But in an electrified system, it's decentralized. It can be in a demand management, it can be in centralized batteries, it can be our home batteries, it can be our cars. So in a way, we have a lot more flexibility, but we just need to properly design the system and also, for example, set rules. Who should get the priority to use those flexibility, and that we need new design of that new system.
So what you said very shortly, in brief, is that we need a different way of approaching, just as you showed us here. So then we asked if you thought that an electrified system will be more resilient, and we asked the others. I don't know if we can get the answers on the screen, maybe. Otherwise, Anders, do you recall? There we are.
Now we ended up with the last question.
Yep. So back there. Yeah. Equally resilient.
That's pretty fair, I think. I mean, you can also argue for higher level of resilience. For example, you can generate electricity in numerous different ways. You can do it nationally, and you... Yeah, so that's why one thing, why I see my own area of research is also getting a lot more attention, because here we can make electricity in Sweden, but we need to produce, let's say, wind power plants. We need to have solar farms and so on, and then it comes back to the materials again. So the great thing with electricity and more higher level of resilience on this broad issue is that it's an immense amount of energy which we can harvest from the sun, but then you know we have to have all the technology available, and if we don't, then of course if you destroy the electricity grid and we can't rebuild it, then we have a huge problem.
So it seems, Sonja, as you presented it, coordination with different stakeholders and collaboration is the issue here. Where does policy making come into play? Is that what we have to do first of all, or how does this interplay?
I think they're in parallel, and in many ways, in reality, policy can go first, and then you have stakeholder discussion, or the other way around. And there's one saying that we shouldn't put the cart before the horse, or we should know where we're going before we have the policy. But in reality, we often have policy target, policy goals, then we decide how to do it in reality, and then you iterate. So there's, in reality, it's always an iterative process.
Parallel and iterative, yes. So a question here, what is the cost to create a resilient electrified system if the grid etc. needs to be redesigned, I mean total makeover? Is it connected to high cost or high investment, do you think? Anders?
Well, it is coupled to a lot of investment. On the other hand, we kind of need to invest and build up the electricity grid and electricity generation kind of anyway. And we need to transition to something. I think that's one key thing to say here, of course, is that we're not really electrifying just for because it's great. We also need to move away from the fossil paradigm. And then, of course, we need to invest out of that. That's so. Yeah, the answer is yes. But there are numerous different pathways to do this, which are more or less cost efficient, of course, and that a lot can be said about that.
Someone asks, is it not likely that an electrified system will be less resilient in the transition phase, so bridging over from old to new?
If we're not ready, yes. So, I mean, I'm actually very pleased to see the audience, very few people think it's going to be less resilient. And so everybody's an expert to some extent and also very optimistic. But it does have the potential to be less resilient, as we see, as the example I show in the snowstorms, the chargers don't work, high, queuing for charging and stranded vehicles on the road. We see that, we saw that in the news. So if we don't prepare in advance, if we don't plan for it, we will end up in a less resilient state. The question is, how long do we want to be there? You know, if we prepare now, if we think about the planning across institutions and coordination, designing rules about when an event hit, who has the priority, what's the protocols, then we can definitely end up with, and what are the resources we can draw from? Do we do batteries? Do we convert hydrogen into fuels? All those are, it's a massive amount of work we need to do right now.
So preparedness is key.
Yes.
And proactivity is key here. Anders, a short comment, and we move on to the second question.
I was just thinking, I mean, one of the technologies which is coming, which are now being introduced, capability for vehicle to grid, for example, is being put into vehicles. And even if that could be a way to increase the resilience of the electricity system. So you can go with local supply, you can supply your own house if there is an outage, for example. So, and there we will meet another KPI in terms of resilience compared to maybe a charging station breakdown. So there are, you shift between different problems.
Absolutely. So it's a 360-degree approach in a way. So let's take the second Mentimeter question and see what came up there, please.
Can I say one thing about
V2?
V2G, because I think that's a very interesting example. I've been to a lot of V2G meetings, and a lot of discussion really focus on technical aspects. How much can we supply electricity in the emergency situation? But I think in reality, do I want to put my electricity back to the grid if there's an emergency strike? No. I want to be able to go somewhere. And so this human aspect is super important, and we need to think about, should policymakers regulate? You must. Or not. And the human aspect and the institutional regulation is, again, super important to have that planned and prepared.
So let's move on to recycling, Anders. This is something that you focus on in your work. To what extent will battery recycling contribute to the transition to electrification? You see, it's quite a spread.
It's quite a spread.
What do you think?
I think this is interesting because we discussed this question in advance, and a key word here to me is the word the transition. And where are we right now? We are at, on a global level. Think during 2025 it was reported about 4% of the global passenger vehicle fleet, which was battery electric. And and they last for maybe 15 years or plus that, meaning that we need to build up 95% from primary resources. So basically, to me, if I take a simple answer, none.
Ouch.
Because you can't recycle your way to an electrified fleet. In the steady state future, on the other hand, it's a key thing to have these resources available.
What time scale are we talking about?
Well, I think that this is ongoing, so maybe a more nuanced answer is some, to say, because of course we need to do it already now, right? Otherwise we don't know anything about it. But if we really look at, to build all of these new vehicles, we can't recycle our way there. On the other hand, in the future, it's crucial. So 15, 20 years away, we will have a lot of vehicles coming in, and then we need to be able to recycle
15, 20 years, duly noted. Sonja, what's your opinion?
I fully with Anders in the sense that we have very small stock right now, so recycling that small stock wouldn't help us with the transition. In the future, it will be important and critical, and I think that's the key. When I work on biofuels for decades, and the key is we have to make sure this recycling is sustainable. We make sure we have clear goals and clear standards right now, so people are convinced that we can recycle when we reach the large scale. In the case of biofuel, I think because people were not convinced we can do it sustainably even at a small scale, people did not want to go to a large scale. And so even though if we're at a small scale, we need to make sure people are buying into the prospect of the future.
Absolutely, evidence-based acceptance here.
Yes.
We are going to move on to the third and last Mentimeter question. Should national large-scale extraction of minerals in Sweden be supported for electrification? 71% claim yes, and the rest no. And this is a hot topic. Anders, what do you say?
Yeah, first of all, I mean, it's a very broad question. You can't ask a huge question. I mean, we obviously extract a lot of minerals in Sweden. We're a great mining nation, if you ask, especially the mining industry. Yes, so there are many aspects in this. Of course, if you open up a new mine, I mean, one of the things which are really, really hard to recycle is the rare earth elements in the magnets of the electric machines of an electric vehicle, also in large wind power plants. That way you can do it, but in cars it's really, really tricky. So how do we secure the availability of that in Europe and for Sweden and for Swedish automakers and machine makers and so on? Well, then you have to be thinking in the yes direction here, of course. But I do understand then clearly, then if you live somewhere where you will open a mine, you will have huge change to the land. You will impact on other, farmland, forestry. If we're up north, it will impact on the Sami population and the reindeer herding. It will always be a risk for water bodies and freshwater bodies. When you extract a lot of things out of the ground, you typically get heavy metals. If you do that north of Gränna, which has, investigated for a long time, there is a risk for contamination in Vättern. So there is both good and bad sides here. But on the other hand, we have very strict regulation, environmental regulation in Sweden. And if we compare to the materials we buy today for batteries, for example, from Indonesia and so on, there is a lot of pollution going on there, impacting the freshwater bodies of the people living in Indonesia.
Still, it provides work to the people there and maybe generates wealth.
Yes, it does.
But
so
I'm
that's
just being the devil's advocate here.
That's also a very important aspect here. It's often talked about Congo and the extraction of cobalt. And Congo stands for, I think, about 70% of the world's cobalt extraction. And 1/5 of that is artisanal, meaning that you basically dig out by hand. On the other hand, and that sounds horrible, a lot of kids are doing it, it's really dangerous. But it's also a possibility to do that on a more organized way with a larger share of industrialized extraction. It's a possibility for Congo to create wealth and build structure around that. So to try and just get rid of Congolese cobalt is probably not a good idea for Congo. So it's a very, very tricky topic.
It is indeed. Lots of trade-offs to be made there. It's sort of an open-ended answer. We don't really know, but open for discussion, definitely. Sonja?
Yeah, I fully agree. And I also think that these two group of people might actually agree with each other if you change the question to how. How do we do it right? And in our previous discussion leading to this, I used Norwegian oil as an example. There's a discussion on should Norway extract its vast oil resources, and they do because there are a lot of benefits, but you have to make sure you do it the right way. You have the society back up, and you recognize the distributional effect on the society and do it in the right way. A couple years ago, we actually published a paper in Science on the LCF of oil extraction, and Norway is #1 in terms of the cleanest, the least minimum greenhouse gas emissions, and of course they're very happy. And I think that's an evidence of you want to figure out how to do it right, rather than, yes, whether, but also how.
Yeah, and the benefit, of course, with mining for several of these materials is that there we actually don't have to have the pollution by burning that oil in the end. That we can do from a climate impact point of view. Clean.
Yeah. So
but this question relates to the fact that there's always a trade-off. I mean, and I think we should always be aware of that.
We're approaching the end of our discussion, but I have a question that very well sums up what we need to do now. How do we effectively create agile and updated policymaker? Because you really changed, at least my concept of what a policymaker is, Sonja. How can we breach non-updated narratives and ideologies to be based on current knowledge? How do we make the best policymakers?
Yes, I think that's a terrific question, and I kind of relate back to the comment I made earlier. Working in California for a decade, deeply involved in the policy making. It's an iterative process. Sometimes we cannot avoid putting cart in front of horse. Because policy needs to set goals, but when you set those goals and target, you don't know all the details. Those details will only emerge when you start doing things. And so having this stakeholder process where the policy process is transparent and open and encourage engagement of the stakeholders is the magic recipe or the most critical component to make a good policy.
So education, knowledge, I hear.
Yes.
Maybe democracy somewhere?
Democracy,
Yeah.
of course. And I would say, as an expert, academic expert, I consider myself an equal part on the table because I have the knowledge, but their interests are on stake. So we all have something that are important at the table.
Anders?
Yeah, I think it is obviously tricky because you need, especially from the researcher's point of view, you want to be able to guide. I mainly, in my research, work with industry and try to guide their work to improve, their products and so on. But they are, of course, heavily influenced by the policy. And very large, just putting a price on carbon, as we are doing in Europe, is super important on the global level. That needs to be done everywhere. So I think key things like that. But just, don't do things in the completely wrong direction, which we see in the world.
And hopefully
today.
researchers are there to lead people right then.
Yeah,
Should
definitely.
Should they go astray?
Yeah.
And can I add
Sure.
one thing that kind of react to what you say they are heavily influenced by policy, which is super true. At the same time, they are also heavily influencing
The policy makers.
policy making process. In California, we have a saying is, if you're not on the table, you're on the menu.
And sometimes, you have a push for, the battery regulation is interesting because there has been a discussion with the industry for a long time. It's important to have all this recycling that we talk about, but maybe we ended up with this too early put into regulation, partly over-regulating, and then you can maybe, hinder innovation.
True.
To some
Timing
extent.
is
So
key. Ask any jazz musician.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sonja and Anders, for this inspiring discussion. And the best of luck here at Transportforum and in your future endeavors as researchers. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.
Ja, äras den som äras bör, hör ni. Strukturstiftelsen delar årligen ut pris för bästa examensarbete inom trafik och transport. Vi ska föra mer om detta av Anders Mexén, Strukturstiftelsen. Välkommen upp.
Tack så mycket, Karin. Ska vi se. Jag tror det finns en sån här. Är vi där? Hej Transportforum. Anders Mexén heter jag. Jag är ledamot i Strukturstiftelsen. Och jag heter egentligen Per Fladvad, Olof Hultén och Mats Textes stiftelse. Och vad håller vi på med? Vi börjar med en liten film.
Det är lätt att göra som man alltid har gjort. Men när byggsektorn står för mer än 20% av världens klimatpåverkan måste vi ändra på vårt sätt att bygga våra samhällen. Vi måste tänka nytt. Och det finns det de som gör. Strukturstiftelsen stödjer forskning och nya idéer inom hållbart samhällsbyggande. Vi visar på områden att förbättra. Vi jobbar för att fler duktiga ska söka sig till branschen. Och vi bidrar med kunskap och resurser till de som letar nya lösningar. Så vill vi dra vårt strå till stacken för en långsiktigt hållbar samhällsutveckling.
Vårt syfte här det är att dels så är vi en stark, kapitalstark minoritetsägare faktiskt till Struktor. Men främst så jobbar vi med forskning och utveckling, eller vi hjälper till att främja forskning och utveckling genom hållbart samhällsbyggande. Och det gör vi på lite olika sätt. Vi har några adjungerande professurer inom brobyggande, samverkansbroar i Luleå och inom VA-teknik vid Chalmers. Och sen har vi en professur inom AI för byggbranschen i Lund. Vi har också lite tväranalyser och vi har gjort en tväranalys på lite grann det här ämnet som vi pratar om nu. Om det så vi har mycket slagghögar och gruvavfall ligger runt om i Mälardalen bland annat och på många andra ställen som är en outnyttjad resurs. Det är samtidigt som det är ett miljöproblem kanske. Så att det finns mycket problematik kring utvinning därifrån, men det här var ett sätt att lyfta det här. Så det kan man läsa om man vill på vår hemsida. Vi har också gjort analyser inom återvinning och bättre nyttjande av cement i betong och så där. Vi jobbar också med en del metodutveckling för att stötta bra idéer. Sen hjälper vi stöttar och inspirerar, försöker i alla fall, studenter. Och det gör vi bland annat genom att ha något som vi kallar för X-Day, där vi i slutet av deras utbildningar där man kan få lite extra inspiration och få lite ta en del av tidigare studenters arbetsliv och hur det har varit att komma ut på arbetsmarknaden och hur det är att jobba. Sen premierar vi bra examensarbeten och det är därför vi är här nu. Vi delar ut årligen då, som det är nu, 9 sådana priser per år. Och varav ett är då i hållbar trafik. Det är därför vi är här idag. Och det här gör vi i ett samarbete med Trafiktekniska föreningen och VTI. Vi är tacksamma för att vi får här uppmärksamma det här. Och Trafiktekniska föreningen, de samlar in de här exjobben och har utgjort jury. De har kommit fram till motiveringen för bästa exjobb som jag ser här. Nu läser jag innantill här. Examensarbetet ger ett betydande bidrag till att öka förståelsen för de ekonomiska förutsättningarna för elektrifiering av tunga vägtransporter. Genom att kombinera vetenskapligt underlag med insikter från relevanta aktörer genomfördes ett gediget och välstrukturerat arbete, vilket resulterade i en beräkningsmodell för att jämföra el- och diesellastbilar. Slutresultatet utmärker sig genom att erbjuda ett konkret verktyg för beslutsfattare och främjar möjligheterna till en medveten och långsiktig utveckling av transportsektorn. Och bästa examensarbete inom hållbar trafik, det har tilldelats Emil Myrberg och Emelie Ricknell. Och då kommer inte här då, tyvärr. De är upptagna, men de har lämnat ett meddelande till oss här.
Hej allesammans! Hoppas ni har ett fantastiskt transportforum och tråkigt att vi inte kunde vara på plats idag. Jag, Emil, har tillsammans med Emil skrivit ett exjobb som utvärderar investeringskostnader för ellastbilar.
Precis. Jag tyckte det var otroligt spännande att få djupdyka i ekonomin bakom elektrifieringen av ellastbilar och att få bygga en konkret modell som beräknar just då totalkostnaden för investeringen. Extra kul är det att vår Excel-modell finns idag att ladda ner via Lindholmens Science Parks hemsida, där du då som användare kan ladda ner verktyget och se vilka ekonomiska faktorer som avgör för när en investering i ellastbilar blir mer lönsam än en investering i en diesellastbil.
Så stort tack till Struktorstiftelsen som genom sitt fina stipendium uppmuntrar till fördjupning inom trafik och transport. Ta hand om er. Hej.
Nej.
Ja. Härliga killar.
Tack så mycket Anders, härligt. Och här kan vi faktiskt ladda ner då om vi tittar närmare på killarnas exjobb här. Härligt, främja de nya krafterna och nya tankar, det gör ni med den här, ni också. Ja. Tack så mycket
Tack så
Anders.
mycket.
Ja. Ja, då har vi kommit till vägs ände för plenum dag 2 Transportforum. Vi har sammanlagt 120 sessioner de här 2 dagarna, 11 seminariespår. Det fortsätter ju här också inne. Vi var inne på en elektrifiering under dagen, kan man följa här i Karusellhallen. Sen finns det ju ett liv efter detta också, och då handlar det ju om att Transportforum 2027 inträffar 13 till 14 januari 2027. Jag ska se om du kan ta fram den. Där var den! Så be there or be square, but tills dess så får vi ut mesta möjliga av Transportforum 2026 tillsammans. Kunskap, inspiration, nätverkande. Tack ska ni ha. Hej då!